What if the kings we remember as heroes were hiding terrifying secrets behind their crowns? Welcome to Mark's History Channel, the channel where we uncover the darkest mysteries, forgotten crimes, and hidden truths buried deep within history. Behind the golden thrones of medieval Europe stood rulers feared by their enemies, and sometimes even by their own families. Kings poisoned brothers, executed wives, started wars for power, and hid horrifying secrets from the world. Tonight we travel into the shadows of medieval castles to uncover the darkest secrets medieval kings desperately tried to erase from history. And trust me, some of these true stories are darker than fiction. In medieval Europe, kings were rarely chosen peacefully. The crown was not simply inherited, it was fought for, and sometimes stolen. One of the most disturbing examples comes from 15th century England during the brutal conflict known as the Wars of the Roses, a civil war between two rival royal families, the House of York and the House of Lancaster. At the center of this nightmare stood Richard III. When King Edward IV suddenly died in 1483, his 12-year-old son, Edward V, was supposed to become king. But England was unstable. Powerful nobles feared losing influence, and rumors quickly spread that Edward IV's children were illegitimate. Richard, the dead king's brother, stepped forward as Lord Protector, supposedly to guide the young king until adulthood. But within weeks, everything changed. The young Edward V and his younger brother Richard of Shrewsbury were moved into the Tower of London. At first, this wasn't unusual. The tower was traditionally used as a royal residence before coronations. But then, the boys disappeared, completely. Witnesses reported seeing the princes playing near windows less and less often, until eventually they vanished entirely. No official explanation was ever given. No public funeral, no bodies, nothing. Soon after, Richard declared himself king. To this day, historians still debate whether Richard III ordered the murder of his nephews. Some believe loyal supporters killed the boys to secure Richard's rule. Others argue later Tudor historians exaggerated the story to destroy Richard's reputation after his death. But what makes the mystery so haunting is that no definitive answer has ever been found. Centuries later, in 1674, workers discovered the skeletons of two children buried beneath a staircase in the Tower of London. Many believe the remains belonged to the missing princes. But even modern investigations cannot say with certainty, and that uncertainty became part of the horror. Because medieval politics created a terrifying reality. Children could become threats to the throne, and in the fight for power, even family members were not safe. Few kings in history became more feared inside their own palace than England's Henry VIII. Today, Henry is remembered as the king with 6 wives. But behind that famous phrase lies a terrifying story of paranoia, politics, and death. At the beginning of his reign, Henry was admired. He was athletic, educated, charismatic, and popular with the English people. But one problem slowly consumed him. He desperately wanted a male heir. In medieval Europe, producing a son was considered essential for preserving royal stability. Without one, civil war could erupt after a king's death. Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, failed to produce a surviving son. After years of frustration, Henry attempted something shocking. He tried to annul his marriage, but the Pope refused. And that refusal triggered one of the most important religious events in European history. Henry broke away from the Roman Catholic Church and created the Church of England, making himself the supreme religious authority of the country. This wasn't just about love, it was about power. By controlling the church, Henry gained enormous wealth and authority. Monasteries were dissolved, religious lands were seized, and opposition became dangerous. Then came Anne Boleyn. Anne was intelligent, politically ambitious, and unlike anyone Henry had known before. For years, Henry pursued her obsessively, but once she became queen, the relationship deteriorated rapidly. Anne failed to give Henry the son he wanted. Soon accusations began appearing: adultery, treason, incest. Historians today widely believe many of the charges were fabricated or heavily manipulated. But in 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed at the Tower of London. Witnesses described Anne remaining calm before her death. Some accounts claim the crowd fell silent as the sword fell, and Henry moved on quickly, terrifyingly quickly. Just days later, he became engaged to Jane Seymour. Years later, another wife, Catherine Howard, would also be executed after accusations of adultery. Inside Henry's court, fear became constant. Nobles carefully controlled every word. Servants avoided rumors because one political mistake could end at the execution block. While Western Europe struggled with political conspiracies, Russia faced something even darker, a ruler whose brutality became legendary. Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, became the first ruler officially crowned Tsar of all Russia, and his childhood may help explain the monster he later became. After his father died, young Ivan grew up surrounded by violent political struggles. Powerful noble families competed for control, while the future Tsar witnessed betrayal, abuse, and murder inside the royal court. Historians believe these experiences deeply scarred him psychologically. As an adult, Ivan initially ruled effectively. He expanded Russian territory and centralized power. But after the death of his beloved wife Anastasia, everything changed. Ivan became increasingly paranoid. He believed nobles were plotting against him constantly, and his response was terrifying. In 1565, Ivan created the Oprichnina, essentially a state ruled through terror. Its enforcers, the Oprichniki, dressed in black robes and rode black horses. Some carried severed dog heads attached to saddles as symbols of hunting traitors. Entire towns suffered under Ivan's suspicion. One of the worst massacres occurred in Novgorod in 1570. Believing the city planned to betray him, Ivan ordered brutal punishments. Historical accounts describe torture, executions, and mass killings lasting weeks. Thousands died, but perhaps the most tragic moment came inside Ivan's own palace. In 1581, during an argument, Ivan violently struck his son and heir with a staff. The injury proved fatal. One famous painting later captured the horrifying aftermath: Ivan clutching his dying son in absolute terror and regret. The image became one of history's most disturbing portraits of power-destroying family. And when Ivan finally died in 1584, Russia was left traumatized by decades of fear. For medieval kings, power could disappear overnight, and few rulers experienced a more terrifying downfall than King Edward II of England. Edward became king in 1307 after the death of his father, Edward I, one of England's most feared warrior kings. But Edward II struggled to rule effectively. He preferred close personal friendships and court life over military leadership, which angered many powerful nobles. His relationship with Piers Gaveston became especially controversial. Edward trusted Gaveston deeply, showering him with titles and influence, while many nobles felt ignored and humiliated. Eventually, tensions exploded. In 1312, rebellious barons captured and executed Gaveston despite Edward's attempts to save him. The king never forgave them, But things only became worse after England suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, where Scottish forces led by Robert the Bruce crushed the English army. Edward's reputation collapsed. Inside the royal court, resentment grew rapidly, especially against Hugh Despenser, the king's new favorite advisor. The Despenser family became notorious for corruption and greed, creating enemies across England. Even Edward's wife, Queen Isabella of France, eventually turned against him. In 1325, Isabella traveled to France and formed an alliance with Roger Mortimer, one of Edward's enemies. The following year, they invaded England. Shockingly, many nobles joined them almost immediately. Edward fled but was eventually captured, imprisoned, and forced to give up the throne to his son, the future Edward III. Then came the mystery. In 1327, Edward II died in captivity under suspicious circumstances. One infamous story claimed he was secretly murdered using a red-hot iron in a way designed to leave no visible wounds. Modern historians still debate whether this horrifying tale is true or later propaganda. But the legend survived for centuries because it captured the brutal reality of medieval politics. A king who lost power could quickly become helpless, and behind the glory of medieval crowns lurked betrayal, fear, and violence. Not all medieval kings hid crimes. Some hid something far more frightening: madness. One of the most tragic examples was King Charles VI of France. At the beginning of his reign, Charles was loved by his people. He became king at only 11 years old and was known as Charles the Beloved. But in 1392, everything changed. While traveling through a forest near Le Mans during a military expedition, Charles suddenly suffered a violent mental breakdown. According to historical accounts, the king believed enemies surrounded him and attacked his own knights in panic, killing several men before being restrained. It was only the beginning. Over the following years, Charles experienced repeated episodes of severe psychosis. Sometimes he forgot his own identity. Other times he failed to recognize his wife and children. And most famously, Charles became convinced his body was made entirely of glass. Historical chroniclers claimed he feared shattering into pieces if anyone touched him too hard. To protect himself, he reportedly wore reinforced clothing. Modern historians still debate his exact illness, but his condition created enormous instability inside France. Powerful noble factions fought for control while the king drifted between moments of clarity and madness. Meanwhile, England took advantage of the chaos during the 100 Years' War. In 1415, French forces suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Agincourt against Henry V of England. And throughout it all, Charles VI remained trapped inside his deteriorating mind. By the time he died in 1422, France had been deeply weakened by war, civil conflict, and political division. The king once called the Beloved became remembered instead as Charles the Mad, a ruler whose broken mind helped break an entire kingdom. The deeper we look into medieval history, the more human these kings become. Not heroic legends, not fairy tale rulers, but deeply flawed people consumed by ambition, fear, grief, paranoia, and violence. Some murdered for power, some destroyed their own families, and others were slowly consumed by madness. Yet despite everything they tried to hide, history remembered. Because no matter how powerful a ruler becomes, and secrets rarely stay buried forever. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into the darkest shadows of medieval history, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true historical mysteries and forgotten horrors. And remember, behind every crown, there may be a secret history the world was never meant to know.